If, at that very second, a single camera flash had gone off in the grimy air of South London, saturated with the smell of cheap tobacco, spilled beer, and amyl nitrite, the British monarchy as we know it would have collapsed by morning, burying the reputation of the House of Windsor beneath its rubble. Imagine this scene. 1988, 11:45 p.m., the Vauxhall district, a place where respectable Londoners are afraid to set foot even during the day, and at night it turns into a playground for society's most outcasted layers. You are standing in front of the entrance to the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, a legendary gay bar famous for its brawls, strict sex code, and a crowd that recognizes no authority other than a leather whip. The air here vibrates with heavy bass and danger, but the most terrifying thing isn't happening in the dark corners of the establishment. It's happening right at the bar, where a figure whose face is printed in every other newspaper in the world is pinned within a dense ring of sweaty bodies. You think you know everything about Princess Diana? You remember her in wedding dresses, in tiaras, on charity missions in Africa, but you have never seen her as she was that night. Standing next to her, laughing and gesturing with that inimitable theatricality that made stadiums roar with delight, is Freddie Mercury. They are alone. No bodyguards, no royal entourage, no evacuation plan. This isn't a social event. It's a prison break from a maximum security facility, executed with nothing but audacity and a bottle of champagne, drunk for courage. But how could the most photographed woman on the planet, whose silhouette is recognizable even from behind in a fog, end up in the epicenter of the gay underground and remain unnoticed? The answer to this question lies not in magic or bribery, but in a single object that Freddie pulled from the closet of his friend, comedian Kenny Everett, just 20 minutes before leaving. This is the very dagger you must remember every second of this story, because it is exactly what separates triumph from global catastrophe. Look closely at the lad standing next to Mercury. He is wearing a baggy, scuffed army jacket in khaki that smells of dust and someone else's sweat. It is 2 sizes too big. It is shapeless. It is ugly. But it was precisely this piece of coarse fabric that became a cloak of invisibility for the future queen. Freddie, with the genius of a great director, understood one simple thing. To hide a swan, you must dress it as an ugly duckling. He pulled this jacket onto Diana, hid her famous hairstyle under a cap, and her sad eyes under mirrored aviator glasses, and in that same second, Lady Di vanished. In her place appeared a pretty, slightly clumsy young man, a gay model, as Freddie jokingly dubbed her, ready to plunge into the nightlife. But why? Why risk everything for a pint of cheap beer in a place where syringes and broken glass crunch on the floor? You think it was the whim of a spoiled aristocrat? This is where the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, flipping your perception. It wasn't a whim. It was a cry for help. An hour earlier, in Everett's apartment, Diana was sitting on the sofa and she wasn't laughing. She was suffocating. The paparazzi camped outside her windows 24 hours a day. Every move she made was analyzed. Every breath became a headline. She was a golden bird in a cage whose bars were made of camera flashes. She looked at Freddie and Kenny with such longing that it broke their hearts, and she uttered the phrase that launched this insane mechanism. I want to go where it's fun. I want to go where I can be nobody. Any normal person would have said no. It's suicide. If tomorrow the tabloids came out with the headline "Drunk Princess in Gay Den," the monarchy wouldn't just stagger. It would declare war. But Freddie Mercury was not a normal person. He was a rebel who lived by his own rules. He looked at this fragile woman, crushed by her own fame, and instead of talking her out of it, he winked and said, "Let the girl have some fun." In that moment, he took on a responsibility heavier than any grand piano. He became her guide into a hell that, for her, was meant to be paradise. But look at the street in front of the bar. Do you feel this sticky fear? They have stepped out of the car. There are 10 meters to the entrance of the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. 10 meters of open space. If even one person recognizes her gait, if even one onlooker notices that familiar profile under the cap, it's over. Freddie goes first. He isn't hiding. On the contrary, he walks as if he owns this sidewalk. This is part of his brilliant plan, a psychological trap for the crowd. He knows that the human eye always latches onto the brightest spot, and he must be that spot. He is the diversion. He is the human decoy. As they approach the doors, from which deafening music and the smell of sweaty bodies erupt, Diana's heart is beating so hard it feels audible on the other side of the Thames. She clenches her hands in the pockets of that very army jacket, feeling the coarse fabric that is currently her only defense against disgrace. She knows that inside, a crowd of men awaits, heated by alcohol, men who do not recognize etiquette and do not bow to princesses. But she takes a step forward, not because she is brave, but because the thirst for freedom is stronger than fear. You think the hardest part is going in? You're wrong. The hardest part is walking through the crowd to the bar, ordering a drink, and not giving yourself away with your voice, your posture, your manners. The royal family teaches restraint, but here, in this cauldron of vice, restraint is the marker of an outsider. She needs to become one of the guys. She needs to dissolve. And so Freddie's hand pushes the heavy, sticker-covered door, and a wave of noise hits them in the face. In this second, there is no turning back. Either they pull off the most daring scam of the century, or tomorrow morning, Diana's name will be dragged through the mud, and Freddie will be the man who destroyed the reputation of the Windsors. They cross the threshold, and the darkness of the bar swallows them, hiding a secret that would only become an urban legend years later, when one of them is no longer alive, and the second would mourn him, remembering these 20 minutes as the happiest in her tragic life. But for now, they are only entering, and no one, absolutely no one in this room, suspects that the lad in khaki making his way to the bar is the future Queen of Hearts. To understand how this insane outing became possible at all, we need to rewind the tape 60 minutes and move from the grimy alleyway of Vauxhall to a cozy Kensington apartment, saturated with the smell of expensive cigarettes and elite champagne, belonging to the famous comedian Kenny Everett. You likely imagine royal leisure as a stiff reception with porcelain cups and discussions about the weather, but the reality of that evening resembled a surreal dream that would have driven Freud mad. Imagine this scene. In one room, sitting on a sofa, are Freddie Mercury, the planet's greatest showman, Kenny Everett, the television star, actress Cleo Rokos, and the Princess of Wales, the future Queen of England. They are drinking Bellinis, eating jam on toast, and watching the sitcom The Golden Girls on TV, drowning out the sound with their own laughter. It would seem a perfect idyll, an evening of friends sheltered from the storm of fame. But if you had looked into Diana's eyes the moment the laughter died down, you would have seen not joy, but the black, hopeless longing of a hunted animal. This is the first loop of tension. Why does the most beloved woman in the world, who has palaces, jewels, and the adoration of millions, look like she's sitting on death row? The answer lies behind the curtains of this apartment. Outside, on the street, dozens of paparazzi are on watch. They are always there. They are waiting for her to come out, for her to sneeze, for her to do anything that can be sold to the tabloids. Diana was not a guest at this party. She was a fugitive who had hidden from her jailers for a couple of hours. She turned to Freddie, and a note sounded in her voice that made the blood of those present run cold. I can't take this anymore. I want to go where real life is. I want to go where it's dirty, where it's noisy, and where no one makes curtsies. Kenny Everett turned pale. He knew what she was talking about. Rumors of the legendary gay bar Royal Vauxhall Tavern circulated all over London. It was a place not for the faint of heart. An atmosphere of a hardcore underground reigned there. Brawls could break out. People had sex in the toilets. And most importantly, it was the last place on earth the mother of the heir to the throne should appear. "Diana, you've gone mad," Cleo Rokos whispered, feeling the cozy evening turn into a constitutional crisis. They'll tear you apart for souvenirs. If the press finds out, it will be the end of the monarchy. Do you think that stopped Diana? This is where the conveyor principle kicks in. The more she was told no, the brighter the fire in her eyes burned. A prohibition for her was not a wall, but a red rag. She looked at Freddie with a plea that only he could understand. Why him? Ask yourself honestly, who else in this room knew what it was like to be a god to the crowd and a lonely person in the mirror? Freddie Mercury. He saw in Diana not a princess, but his own reflection. He saw the same golden cage from which he himself had tried to escape his whole life through drugs, parties, and music. In that moment, Freddie did something that changed everything. Instead of supporting the voice of reason, instead of saying, "Your Highness, it's too dangerous," he finished his glass, slammed it down on the table, and uttered the phrase that became legendary, "Let the girl have some fun." It wasn't just an answer, it was an order. Freddie took command of the operation. But how to get Britain's most recognizable face to the center of the city and remain unnoticed? You think they called in makeup artists? Glued on a mustache? No, there was no time. The solution had to be instant and brilliant in its simplicity. Freddie began rummaging through Kenny Everett's closets, throwing designer clothes onto the floor until he found what he was looking for, the very dagger of our story. Look at this item. It was an old, scuffed, shapeless khaki army jacket. It smelled of dust and mothballs. It was ugly, and that is why it was perfect. Freddie tossed it to Diana. Put it on. Do you expect the princess to wince? That she would ask for something more elegant? The Santa Barbara effect hits full force. Diana grabbed that dirty rag as if it were a coronation mantle. She pulled it over her silk dress, drowning in the massive shoulders. Then Freddie found a black leather cap and a pair of mirrored aviator glasses. The transformation process was like a magical ritual. With every item put on, Lady Di vanished. The grace vanished. The fragility vanished. That royal polish vanished. The cap hid her famous hairstyle. The glasses hid her sad eyes, and the jacket turned her figure into a shapeless silhouette. She walked up to the mirror. Looking back at her wasn't a future queen. Looking back was a pretty, slightly ridiculous lad, a gay model on a night out, as Freddie jokingly dubbed her. Diana smiled, and for the first time that evening, there was no pain in that smile. "I look like nobody," she said, and her voice held pure delight. To be nobody, that was a luxury she hadn't been able to afford since she was 19. But the plan was only half ready. Clothing is just a disguise, but what about behavior? How to hide that innate aristocratic posture that gave her away from a mile off? Freddie walked right up to her, took her by the shoulders, and looked straight into the dark lenses of the glasses. "Listen to me carefully," he said in the tone he usually used to give instructions to musicians before a concert. "You don't speak, you don't take off the glasses, you stay close to me. I will be your shield. Everyone will be looking at me because I am Freddie fucking Mercury. And you are just a shadow. You are my accessory. Do you understand, lad?" "Understood," Diana replied, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Silence hung in the apartment. Kenny and Cleo looked at the pair with horror and admiration. It was madness. It was Russian roulette with a full chamber. If the cops stopped them, if a fight started in the bar, if the cap fell off Diana's head, the consequences would be catastrophic. The scandal would not only destroy Diana's reputation, it could cost her custody of her children. She was betting everything: the crown, her sons, the future. For what? For 20 minutes in a smoke-filled bar? You ask this question, and it seems logical to you, but you forget that logic doesn't work where a person is suffocating. For Diana, it was a matter of survival. She needed to prove to herself that she still existed as a person, not just as a function of the monarchy. She was ready to risk the throne for a breath of freedom. Freddie understood this. He opened the apartment door. "Right, you bitches. Let's go," he threw out, and in that vulgar summons, There was more nobility than in all the speeches of Parliament. They went out into the hallway. The noise of the elevator seemed deafening. Every step toward the exit of the building brought them closer to the point of no return. Outside, it was dark and damp. They dove into a waiting taxi, trying not to get caught in the light of the street lamps. The driver didn't even turn around upon seeing the strange company. The car started, carrying them away from safe, sterile Kensington toward dangerous, unpredictable Vauxhall. Diana sat in the back seat, clenching her hands in the pockets of that jacket, her heart beating in time with the wheels. She wasn't going to a party. She was going to meet herself. But she didn't yet know that the hardest test awaited her, not at the entrance, but inside, when she would have to face a crowd that does not forgive mistakes, and where her only defense would be the audacity of Freddie Mercury. The heavy sticker-covered door of the Royal Vauxhall Tavern slammed shut behind them with a dull, final thud, cutting off the cold London air and plunging them into an atmosphere that resembled the vestibule of hell. If hell played a loud disco beat and smelled of cheap amyl nitrite. The very second they crossed the threshold, they were hit by a tsunami of sounds, smells, and bodies, and anyone used to the sterile silence of Buckingham Palace should have immediately turned and run to save their sanity. But Diana didn't run. She froze, stunned, blinded by the flashes of strobes that caught fragments of sweaty backs, leather harnesses, and greedy eyes from the darkness. Do you think that, at that moment, she regretted her decision? Do you think fear paralyzed her? You're wrong. In that second, standing in that baggy army jacket, she felt not terror, but an electric charge piercing her spine, because for the first time in 10 years, no one was looking at her. But how long can this invisibility last in a room packed with people whose instincts are honed to the limit in search of partners for the night? Only Freddie Mercury knew the answer to that question, and he realized they had only a few seconds before someone noticed the strange, too elegant lad in the cap huddling against the wall. And then Freddie put his plan into action, one as brilliant as it was insane. Do you expect him to try and slip by unnoticed? That he would pull up a hood and hide his face? This is where the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, flipping the logic of conspiracy on its head. Instead of hiding, Freddie stepped into the very center of the crowd and exploded. He threw his hands up, greeting the room, and his famous laugh drowned out even the thundering bass from the speakers. He began shouting greetings to strangers. He slapped someone on the shoulder. He ordered drinks for people he was seeing for the first time in his life. Why was he doing this? Why attract attention to yourself when you are performing a secret operation? It was a high-level diversionary maneuver. Freddie turned himself into a living flashbang grenade. He knew mass psychology better than any sociology professor. People only see what shines the brightest. He became the sun, blinding everyone around so that Diana could remain in the shadow. The crowd reacted instantly. It was the effect of a bursting bomb. "It's Freddie! It's Mercury!" The whisper turned into a shout, and a wave of human bodies surged toward him. Men in leather, drag queens, ordinary laborers, all of them, like moths to a flame, rushed toward the star, creating a dense, impenetrable ring around him. Do you see this picture? Freddie squeezed from all sides, smiling, winking, handing out autographs on napkins, but his eyes, hidden behind dark glasses, were carefully watching what was happening behind his back. He sacrificed his comfort. He allowed the crowd to grab his clothes, touch him, scream in his ear, all for the sake of creating a corridor of emptiness for the one he called "my dear girl." And Diana took advantage of this corridor. She pushed off from the wall. Her hands in the jacket pockets clenched into fists, so tight her knuckles turned white, but she stepped into this chaos. Imagine her path to the bar. These were the longest 10 meters of her life. Every step was like walking through a minefield. To her left, 2 men were kissing so passionately they almost knocked her off her feet. To the right, someone spilled beer, and the splashes hit her trousers. Her heart was thumping somewhere in her throat, cutting off her breath. Don't look anyone in the eye. Just walk. You're a lad. You're a model. You're nobody. This mantra spun in her head. At one point, a large man in a biker jacket, pushing his way toward Freddie, bumped her shoulder. Diana stumbled. Her cap slipped to the side. Do you feel that prick of panic? If the cap falls, if the golden hair spills over her shoulders, the game is over. Tomorrow the headlines will destroy her. Instinctively, she adjusted the visor, tucked her head into her shoulders, and the man walked past. He didn't even apologize. He didn't look at her. To him, she was just an obstacle, another pretty boy in a crowded bar. This indifference, which for anyone else would be an insult, became for Diana the sweetest nectar. She was invisible. She was free. She reached the bar. Here, in the epicenter of the storm, it was slightly calmer, but it was here that her main test awaited. The bartender, a man whose job is to look people in the face. He was busy. He was irritated. He hated this noise. Diana leaned her elbows on the sticky wooden surface. She could smell spilled gin and old wood. She raised her head. The bartender, wiping a glass with a dirty towel, finally noticed her. That very visual silence arrived. All the noise of the club, the shouts around Freddie, the music, all of it vanished as if someone had turned the volume down on a console. Only she and this tired man opposite remained. He was looking at her, straight into her mirrored aviator glasses. A second stretched like an hour. Did he recognize her? Notice the two delicate facial features? Realize he wasn't looking at a man? Scenarios of catastrophe raced through Diana's head. He's going to scream now. He'll point his finger at her. The crowd will turn. What'll it be, handsome? The bartender grunted, without even stopping his glass wiping. Do you hear that sound? It's the sound of a weight lifting from a soul. He called her handsome. He bought it. The masquerade worked. But now she had to open her mouth. Everyone knew the voice of the Princess of Wales, that soft, aristocratic timbre that is impossible to fake or hide. If she spoke in her usual voice, the illusion would shatter. What to do? Try to sound bassy? It would look ridiculous. Stay silent? Impossible. And then Diana did what distinguishes a legend from an ordinary person. She didn't pretend to be a gruff man. She smiled that very shy, disarming smile she usually hid from the cameras, and leaning forward slightly, she said loud enough to be heard over the music, but low enough to hide her intonations. White wine and beer, please. It was the moment of truth. She ordered drinks, not as a princess, being served on a silver platter, but as an ordinary patron paying for her pleasure. The bartender nodded and turned back to the shelves. He didn't freeze in amazement. He didn't ask for an autograph. He just started pouring the wine. In that second, Diana felt a rush of adrenaline that neither royal horse, races, nor skydiving had ever given her. She was standing in the center of London, in a place considered the bottom of society, and for the first time in her life, she felt absolutely, totally normal. She looked toward Freddie. He was still fending off fans, taking the hit for her, but for a fraction of a second, their eyes met over the heads of the crowd. Freddie, noticing she was at the bar, gave her a barely perceptible wink. It was their secret triumph. The bartender placed the glasses in front of her. That's £5, lad. Diana reached into the pocket of that massive jacket. Her fingers found a bill. She handed over the money, cash, which members of the royal family almost never carry with them. Handing over that crumpled piece of paper was the final act of her initiation. She hadn't just bought alcohol. She had bought herself 20 minutes of a life where she owed no one anything. She took the glasses, and her hands did not shake. She turned back to the room, taking a sip of the cheap wine that at that moment seemed tastier than vintage champagne in Buckingham Palace, and she realized that this taste was the taste of freedom mixed with danger, and she was ready to give up the crown for this moment to last forever. But the clock was ticking, and Freddie was already signaling that it was time to leave before the magic dissipated. 20 minutes. exactly how long this outing lasted, but in terms of adrenaline density, those 20 minutes were worth more than a decade of protocol receptions at Buckingham Palace. Diana stood at the bar, clutching a glass of cheap white wine, and every sip seemed like ambrosia because it held the flavor of the forbidden fruit she had plucked from the tree right under the guards' noses. But you understand that in any perfect scam, there is a critical point, the moment of evacuation. It is here, when the goal is achieved and vigilance is blunted by euphoria, that failures most often occur. Freddie Mercury, who had been working as a human shield all this time, diverting the attention of the entire crowd, felt this change in the atmosphere through his skin. The air around them had grown too hot, the gazes too persistent. The magic of invisibility granted by the army jacket had an expiration date, and it was running out with every passing second. Freddie stopped laughing. His face, which had just been shining for the fans, became serious and hard for a split second. He didn't offer Diana his hand. That would have been a fatal mistake. A gentlemanly gesture that could have given her away instantly. Instead, he did something crude, something that fit her role as the pretty companion perfectly. He nudged her in the side with his elbow and threw over his shoulder. "Finish up, kid. We're leaving." Do you feel the nuance? He wasn't addressing her as a princess. He was addressing her as a burden, as a younger brother being dragged around bars. This was the final psychological trick, the final touch of the disguise. Diana, instantly catching the rules of the game, downed the rest of the wine in one gulp, a gesture absolutely unthinkable for a lady at a royal banquet, but perfectly natural for a regular at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, and placed the empty glass on the sticky counter. The way back to the exit was like walking through a minefield, blindfolded. The crowd, heated by the presence of a rock star, didn't want to let Freddie go. People reached out to him. Someone tried to hug him. Someone shouted declarations of love. Freddie moved through this living mass like an icebreaker, pushing bodies aside, but still managing to smile and blow kisses. Diana walked in his wake, head down, face hidden behind the visor of the cap. At that moment, her heart skipped a beat. One of the patrons, a large man in a leather vest, accidentally bumped her shoulder and caught her eye for a second. Time stopped. Diana saw her reflection in his eyes. Did he recognize her? Notice the too soft skin? See the familiar curve of her lips under the dark glasses? If he screams, "It's Diana," now they'll be torn apart for souvenirs. Headlines of tomorrow's papers, scandal, abdication, disgrace, flashed through her mind, but the man only gave a drunken smirk and winked at her, taking her for just another boy looking for adventure. "Watch where you're going, sugar," he grunted and turned away. That insult sounded like the best music to her. She exhaled, and that breath mixed with the cigarette smoke. They were at the door. Freddie pushed the heavy door open, and the cold night air of London hit their faces like a slap, bringing them back to reality. The noise of the bar was instantly cut off, like with a knife. They found themselves on the sidewalk, under the dim light of street lamps. The surroundings were empty. No paparazzi, no flashes, only the silence of the sleeping city and the sound of a taxi driving in the distance. They looked at each other. In this second, there were no titles or ranks between them. There were only two conspirators who had just robbed the Bank of Reality and walked away with a bag full of freedom. Freddie raised a hand, hailing a cab. The car braked. They piled into the back seat, slammed the door, and only when the taxi started, carrying them away from the dangerous place, did the dam break. They began to laugh. This wasn't polite social laughter. It was the hysterical, wild laughter of two people who had just cheated death. Diana pulled the cap from her head, and her golden hair spilled over the shoulders of that same dirty army jacket. She took off the glasses and wiped away the tears brought on by the laughter. "We did it! Freddie, we fucking did it!" she shouted, forgetting protocol, forgetting that the taxi driver could hear. But the driver didn't care. To him, They were just two drunk revelers. And here comes the moment of intellectual orgasm, when all the pieces of the puzzle fit into a single, piercing picture. Look at this jacket. At this shapeless piece of khaki we called the dagger at the very beginning. You think it was just clothing? You're wrong. It was a metaphysical spacesuit. Freddie Mercury, being a genius of stage image, understood what hundreds of royal stylists did not. To make Diana free, one had to not decorate her, but destroy her beauty. All her life, Diana was dressed so that she would be looked at. Every dress, every hat was created to rivet gazes. She was an object, an exhibit. Freddie did the opposite. He dressed her so that she would become invisible. An army jacket, a symbol of coarseness, masculinity, war, was the total opposite of her English rose essence. By putting it on, Diana didn't just change her wardrobe, she changed her skin. She cast off the weight of millions of people's expectations. In this jacket, she stopped being the Princess of Wales, the mother of the air, a style icon. She became just a person. Nobody. And it was in this state of being nobody that she found that absolute power over her life that she did not have in the palace. Do you see the irony? The most famous woman in the world found herself only when she pretended to be a man in a gay bar. Freddie didn't give her alcohol or a party. He gave her anonymity. This was the most expensive, most luxurious gift one could give to a person who has everything except the right to a private life. In those 20 minutes while she stood at the bar in someone else's clothes, she was happier than during her wedding, which was watched by 750 million people. The taxi sped through night London, returning them to Kensington, back to the Golden Cage. The laughter gradually subsided, giving way to a quiet, melancholic smile. Diana looked out the window at the flickering city lights, still wrapping herself in that coarse jacket, as if trying to preserve the remnants of the warmth of that freedom. She knew that in half an hour, the carriage would turn into a pumpkin. She would have to return the clothes to Kenny Everett, wash off the smell of tobacco, put on silk pajamas, and become the princess again. But inside her, something had changed forever. She realized that the walls of her prison weren't so impenetrable if there was a friend nearby with enough madness to give her the key. Freddie looked at her and stayed silent. He didn't say cliches like, "I told you it would be fun." He understood what was happening in her soul right now. He saw how in her eyes, usually full of sadness, that same spark of rebellion lit up, the one that would later drive her to give the scandalous BBC interview, take up the fight against landmines, and become the Queen of Hearts. That night at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, a new Diana was born, a woman who realized that rules could be broken if you did it with the right people. This outing became their shared secret, sealed with adrenaline and cheap wine, a secret stronger than any royal seal. They survived. They beat the system, if only for 20 minutes. But those 20 minutes were worth a lifetime. The music cuts off sharply on a sad, fading piano chord. The screen goes dark, and in this sudden, deafening silence that follows the wild laughter in the taxi, you are left alone with a black and white collage. Freddie Mercury and Princess Diana, two of the brightest, most photographed, and most tragic faces of the 20th century, look at you from eternity. You are likely smiling, thinking this is just a funny story about how a rock star and an aristocrat got drunk and fooled the system, a sort of historical anecdote with a hint of hooliganism. But don't be in a hurry to close the video, because right now, as the adrenaline of that night has ebbed, we must tear off the final mask and see the terrifying, piercing truth that hides behind this fun. This story is not a comedy. It is a prologue to the two loudest tragedies of the decade, and the fact that they laughed that night makes their end even more unbearable. Think for a second. Why does this legend catch us so deep? Why do we, almost 40 years later, retell it with such awe? Because that night, in the grimy Royal Vauxhall Tavern bar, something greater happened than just a drinking session. Remember that very dagger, the baggy, ugly army jacket that Freddie pulled over Diana. You think it was just a prop for a masquerade? You're wrong. In the context of their fates, this jacket turns into the most powerful symbol imaginable. All her life, Diana was protected by the royal guard. She was driven in armored limousines. She was surrounded by the walls of palaces. But the paradox is that all these bastions couldn't protect her from her main enemy, from loneliness, and from the predatory lenses that would eventually hunt her into the tunnel under the Alma Bridge in Paris. And Freddie? Freddie, who built walls of flamboyance and parties around himself, also turned out to be defenseless in the face of disease and the betrayal of those close to him. And so, that night, the only thing that really worked, the only shield that truly saved the princess from the world, was a piece of cheap fabric offered by a friend. This is where the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, flipping your understanding of friendship. Freddie Mercury, whom the tabloids painted as a libertine and a bad influence, turned out to be a better bodyguard for Diana than the entire Windsor security service. He understood what her husband and her family did not. Diana didn't need diamonds. She needed normalcy. She needed the right to be nobody. And he, risking his reputation, risking being accused of kidnapping or a scandal, gave her those 20 minutes of absolute silence amidst the noise. He gave her air when she was suffocating. Look at their fates. They run parallel, like two rails leading to an abyss. Both were idols. Both were outcasts in their own worlds. He, a gay man in the world of rock and conservative Britain. She, the people's princess, whom the firm hated. Both used their fame to destroy stigmas. Freddie, through music and his fight against AIDS. Diana, through shaking hands with patients others were afraid to touch. Do you feel this connection? That night in the gay bar was no accident. It was a meeting of two kindred spirits, two prisoners who escaped their golden cages for one night just to be human. They found in each other what they couldn't find in a mirror, the reflection of their pain hidden behind a smile. But let's dig even deeper, to where it gets truly painful. This story has a bitter aftertaste because we know the ending. Freddie will go first, burning out in 1991, locking himself in his house, hiding from the very cameras he once loved so much. Diana will follow in 1997, dying in a race with the paparazzi she spent her whole life trying to escape. That army jacket that made her invisible in the bar couldn't protect her in Paris, and the thought of that makes you want to scream. We look at this episode of their friendship as a lost paradise, as proof that happiness was possible, but it was so fragile that it only lasted for 20 minutes and one glass of wine. Now that you see the full picture, from the laughter in the taxi to the funeral processions, from the glint of strobes to the flashes that killed the princess, I want you to stop being just a spectator. I place the scales of history before you, and the pans of these scales tremble with a moral dilemma. We are used to calling Freddie a genius and Diana a saint, but let's be honest. On one hand, Freddie's act can be called insane, irresponsible, and dangerous. He dragged the mother of the future king into a dive bar. If they had been caught, if something had happened to her in that crush, the history of Britain would have taken a different path. He wasn't risking himself, he was risking her. Was he, in that moment, an egoist who wanted to have fun playing with fire? Was he that bad boy pushing Diana to the edge of the abyss? On the other hand, it was an act of supreme humanism. He saw in her not a title, but a living person who was dying of longing. He gave her what no one else could give, a sense of freedom. Perhaps those 20 minutes in a dirty jacket were the only moment in all the 80s when Diana Spencer felt truly alive. Is a friend the one who keeps you safe, or the one who lets you breathe even if the air is poisoned with danger? Who is Freddie in this story, then? A madman who played with the fate of the monarchy for a joke? Or a savior who reached out to a drowning woman when everyone else watched her go to the bottom in her silks? This question has no right answer, because it is about the nature of freedom and the price we pay for it. Go down to the comments right now. I don't want to see emojis or RIP. I want to see your struggle. Whose side are you on in this night venture? Was Freddie a madman who put her at risk, or a friend who saved her soul? Write one word, madman or friend, and explain why, because perhaps in this answer lies the understanding of what it really means to be human in a world that wants to turn you into an icon. I will be waiting for your verdict, because this dispute about that night in London is actually a dispute about the right of each of us to our own 20 minutes of silence.